Do you find yourself wondering sometimes how much in control of your life you really are, and how much happens by coincidence or accident, or in what some people call synchronicity, or maybe it seems like a blessing from God? Well, let's explore that. I've got a couple of different takes on using some Gurdjieff material through the body of work that Nicole presented to explore today. I'm Roach, Mark Roach, bringing perhaps a different perspective to you, to a small group of you that are potentially interested in improving your life or enriching your life or getting to the bottom of what's important to you. You may have encountered trauma and been diagnosed with complex PTSD, or you may just be curious. So before I start sharing some of the old and revised work of Gurdjieff and Nicole, let me tell you, I found this Gurdjieff work by accident. I was working with a Meisner acting coach here in Austin who had me doing some Hermann Hesse work, character work. And as I was exploring Hermann Hesse, through my searches on the internet and through various literary resources that I was researching, I stumbled upon some Gurdjieff work and found it fascinating, and I kept going. And then to top it off, I ended up running into the editor of Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson here in Austin, and met with him and a group of Gurdjieff followers several times here in Austin. And I found their work very parallel to some things that were going on inside of me organically and internally. So that fascinated me. I stepped away from that group and from this editor who had a strong connection to the Gurdjieff Foundation and obviously to all of the Gurdjieff material, but much of that was shared with me and felt very parallel to what I was doing. But I was already doing some what I consider to be more extreme experiments with the Gurdjieff material, although I'd never called it any of the terms that Gurdjieff was using. So Gurdjieff gave a vocabulary to some things that I was doing organically, which I now really appreciate. So one of those things, as I've mentioned in some of my earlier videos, was fasting. And I also do some extreme physical workouts and some work with cold and hot, and also a lot of psychological and highly disciplined work, with willpower. So, and I've experimented, of course, as an actor in various aspects of my life over the years, and brought many of that for self-observation, either with therapists or counselors, or with my fellow acting group to examine and observe myself. So all those things had happened very organically, but the last 3 years in particular, I've been doing a very disciplined, specific fasting routine, which has really opened up even more of the Gurdjieff work to me, as well as some other esoteric biblical texts, and has just really caused a great deal of enlightenment inside of me. I'm not calling myself woke by any means, because this has all been a struggle basically to maintain the rage that I had from an early childhood encounter where I was violated, and to deal with a lot of emotions that I've sought to give dignity to, and then to live in our society without expressing those in ways that are compromising to my fellow man. So I do a lot of routine work that is to nourish and maintain my emotional life, my spirituality, my physicality, and it really falls in line with much of the fourth way that Gurdjieff has spoken to with Ouspensky and much of this Nicole work that I'm speaking to today. So that's where I'm coming from, and by sharing so much of the Gurdjieff work, is that it puts words to some experiences that, I would imagine in another few months or years, I would probably be sharing similar accounts, but this just accelerates it and lets me communicate it concisely for examination of my fellow man or my fellow YouTuber out here. We have a small tribe following the channel right now, which I find encouraging. And, some time ago, I thought, you need a lot of followers to make something feel worthwhile. And now I'm encouraged with a small group of people that really do need this kind of content that I can share with and confide some very intimate parts of my self-discovery in my life, perhaps to connect to other people who have also encountered trauma or are trying to find very dignified ways of dealing with the natural suffering that is part of the human condition that may be even more powerful and useful as we use technology and connect with each other to communicate about what's really going on the earth today. So let me share a couple of takes on some topics about two ways of dealing with things in life. And I'm going to first share like a modern day rewrite, and then I'll go back and share the original text that Nicole published in his fourth volume. Life often feels like it's running us, with every event sapping our energy. But here's a fresh perspective. If we stop identifying with every little thing, we save energy and start waking up. Think of it like this. When you identify with everything, the news, weather, people's opinions, you're just being swept along, not really living. Remember the parable of sheep being used for their wool and meat? It's a reminder that life can keep us asleep unless we consciously choose otherwise. The key is to rebel against our automatic reactions, not life itself. Many people think transformation happens overnight, but understanding this work takes time. There are two approaches to events to consider. One is non-identification. Separate yourself from events. You're under their power only if you identify with them. Number two, willing acceptance. Embrace events actively. For example, I overcame my fear of double-decker buses by willing them to tip over. My fear vanished. When faced with unavoidable tasks, like being reassigned at work unexpectedly, try to will what you have to do. This approach frees you internally and helps you tackle life's unfairness with strength. It's also important to embrace what you must do. Instead of resisting tasks or feeling negative about them, say to yourself, let's do this. It's amazing how much you can accomplish with this mindset. Life isn't fair or just, but by willing what you must do, you gain freedom and inner peace. In essence, handling life events involves choosing them to detach and when to embrace them fully. Sometimes one method works better than the other, or both together. And then there's a secret to conscious love. We must also learn to will one another. This is the start of conscious love. So that was a update of some old work done in 1949 and published by Nicole. Let me now cite the original work. This work teaches that if we do not identify, we save energy. It also teaches that all mankind, that is, the sleeping world of humanity, identifies with every event and loses energy in that event. So we lose energy by identifying with each event. The point of this work is to save energy and not to be eaten by identifying. Unless we save energy, we cannot awaken, because life and its turning events take our energy at every moment. As you have heard many times, some of you, this means you are a machine driven by life and its external events. You identify with this, you identify with that, you identify with everything said to you. You identify with the weather, you identify with the newspapers. As long as you are like this, you are not doing anything, but everything is being done to you, and you are simply being used by life. None of the things that happen on earth due to tyrants, etc., it's comparable to the way in which we are used by life, whose object is to keep us fast asleep. So it is said we are all in prison, but we do not see this. We feel it is someone's fault. Here we err deeply. You remember the parable which compares us with sheep used by farmers? All they want is our wool and meat. In order to get this result, they teach us hymns and warn us not to stray away because dreadful wolves will eat us. And this is quite true, because unless we have reached the level of good housekeeper or householder, and still further, unless we have a magnetic center, if we try to rebel against life, we shall suffer more than before. We become martyrs, suffering from martyrdom. That is why the work starts with people who are at the level of good householder to begin with. We have to rebel against ourselves, not life. Of course, lots of people who come to this work imagine they will be transformed into new beings in a few weeks' time. They're taught not to identify, but of course they do not understand what it means because they continue to take every event of life as a fact, as something very serious, and not as an event. And certainly it takes a very long time before a man or a woman begins to see what this work is about. You may be told that at times you are under 48 orders of law, but you do not see what it means. Now there is one thing I want to talk about tonight in connection with the power of events over you at every moment. There are two ways of dealing with events. One, you become conscious of their mechanical action on you. One is to separate from their power by not identifying, for you're under the power of what you identify with. The other way is to will them. In early days, when I was in this work, one of my tasks was to overcome fear. I was told to observe fear in myself, and fear is a very good thing to observe in yourself. I noticed that I was afraid of the new double-decked buses which used to swing around corners at full speed. I had driven cars for a long time, and so probably was more sensitive for that reason. On one wet day, I got to the top of one of these early buses, and as it swung around a corner at full speed, I willed to fall over. And the extraordinary thing was that fear left me. It had vanished. From that, I learned a great amount of fear comes from hoping something won't happen. Often Mr. Ouspensky gave examples of this kind, which some of you have heard. The general idea was that if some event is inevitable, you can do two things. Either try to separate by non-identifying, or will it and go with it. When I was at the Institute in France, I used to be told about 6 o'clock in the morning when I was on a certain job that I had to go to a different job. I used to think how unfair this was. I did not understand that the concentrated work on being that the Institute was carrying out was partly about becoming negative when you cannot do what you wish to do. Of course, this is very difficult work on oneself because it seems unreasonable, as in the case of the novice who was told to plant cabbages and tended them with the greatest care and went out one morning and found that they had all been plowed up on the purpose because he was so identified. Apart from this, it is a good thing to will what you find yourself having to do because it frees you inside. Whatsoever thine hand findeth to do, do it with all thy might, is a quote from Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10. I would add a commentary to this and would say, whatsoever you find you have to do, do it with all your might. And that means will it, as far as we have will. Once I said there was a good way to observe yourself from another angle, that is, observe what you object to during the day and try to will what you are objecting to and not merely accept it. One has to say to oneself something like this, come, let's go to it. And I assure you, it is a very good way of getting through quite a lot of things that you have to do during the daytime. Why? One reason is that you get negative so easy when you want to do something else, or you do not see why you should have to do this other thing. You say to yourself, this is unfair, but everything in life is unfair. Nothing is fair or just on this earth. And you should read Ouspensky's wonderful chapter on experiential or on experimental mysticism to realize that what he saw through inner perception from a higher plane of understanding was that our idea of justice on this earth is an illusion. On this level, all sleeping humanity belongs to a tiny planet, which is a kind of a lunatic asylum. There is no justice, no fairness. Only if everyone on this earth became conscious, then the whole story would become quite different. Just notice what is happening here in the world today. So instead of referring everything to the idea of fairness and justice, it is far better to will what you have to do in everything and try to awaken from your negative emotions. That will give you freedom and inner peace. Kicking against the pricks will make you more negative and therefore less and less free. This paper is about two ways of taking the events of life. One is that you do not identify with them. The other is that you will them. Sometimes we have to use one method, but sometimes to use the other, or both. I will also tell you a secret. We have to will one another. This is the beginning of conscious love. So I think that a lot of what was said here has to do with attitude and staying positive or neutral and out of the negativity that breeds violence and competition and pulls you into unnecessary endeavors in the world. By doing this and getting that inner freedom that you can cultivate, you can find a deeper connection to yourself and your real mission in life. I'm Mark Roach, wishing you all the best.